A young paramedic lost her job for stopping to help a stranger having a seizure on a Toronto sidewalk. And that stranger turned out to be the mother of the man who would change her entire life. Nora Callahan had exactly 11 minutes to get to the interview. She knew because she'd timed the walk 3 separate times that week. From the Spadina subway exit to the glass tower on Bay Street where Hargrove Medical Group had their headquarters. 11 minutes if she didn't stop for lights and kept her pace sharp. She'd pressed her navy blazer the night before. She'd practiced her answers in the mirror until her roommate knocked on the bathroom door and told her to please, for the love of God, stop saying patient outcomes out loud. This was the interview. Clinical coordinator, one of the best private healthcare groups in the country. After 2 years of working overnight paramedic shifts and watching her applications disappear into the void, this was the one. She had 11 minutes. She had 10 minutes when she heard it. A sound that every paramedic knows before they fully understand it. A gasp that cuts off too sharply. The crack of a knee hitting concrete. The woman was on the sidewalk outside a coffee shop on King Street, and she was seizing. Nora was already moving before the thought was fully formed. She dropped to her knees, checked the woman's airway, rolled her onto her side, checked for objects nearby. The woman was somewhere in her mid-60s, silver-haired, well-dressed. A leather handbag had spilled halfway into the gutter. A few people had stopped and were holding their phones up. One man in a suit watched for a moment, then kept walking. "Call 911. Nora said to no one in particular, and 3 people immediately started dialing as if they'd all been waiting for permission. The seizure lasted about 90 seconds. Long enough. When it passed, the woman lay quietly, breathing, confused the way people always are when they come back to themselves. "You're okay," Nora said. "You had a seizure. I'm a paramedic. Just breathe." The woman blinked at her. "My son," she said. Her voice was still foggy. "He's going to worry. We'll call him. Don't try to sit up yet." Nora stayed with her until the ambulance arrived, 6 minutes that cost her the interview. She knew it while she was crouched there on the King Street sidewalk, one hand steady on the woman's shoulder. She knew it, and she stayed anyway. Because she was a paramedic, because that was who she was, and because there wasn't another version of herself that could have walked away. She called the Hargrove Medical Group from outside the hospital and got a receptionist who was polite in the way that means no. "I understand," the receptionist said. "Unfortunately, the position has been filled." Nora sat on a bench outside Toronto General and looked at the sky for a while. Then she bought a coffee she probably couldn't afford and took the streetcar home. She did not expect to hear from anyone again, which is why, 3 days later, she almost didn't answer the call from the unknown number. "Is this Nora Callahan?" The voice was a woman's. Clear, composed, with that particular quality that suggests someone who hasn't asked a question they didn't already know the answer to in a very long time. "It is. My name is Margaret Hargrove. I believe you helped me on King Street on Thursday." Nora went very still. "I've been told you missed an interview because of me," Margaret continued. "I'd like to make that right. Could you meet me for lunch?" The restaurant was on the 32nd floor of a building Nora had only ever looked up at from the street. Margaret Hargrove was already seated when Nora arrived, dressed in a cream blazer, her silver hair perfectly set. She moved with a slight asymmetry that Nora, who noticed these things, recognized as someone still recovering, possibly always recovering. "You have good hands," Margaret said by way of greeting, before Nora had even sat down. "I noticed, even in the state I was in. You didn't hesitate. It's training." "No." Margaret looked at her directly. "Plenty of trained people hesitated. You didn't." She folded her hands on the table. "I'd like to offer you the clinical coordinator position." Nora stared at her. "The candidate we selected withdrew," Margaret continued smoothly. "It happens. The position is still open. Your application was already strong. I looked at it myself this morning. The interview was a formality." Nora put her coffee cup down. "Mrs. Hargrove, I appreciate this, but I don't want a job because you feel you owe me something." Margaret smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached her eyes. "I'm not offering you a job because I owe you something. I'm offering you a job because I think you're exactly what this organization needs, and because I've been in healthcare for 30 years, and I can tell the difference between someone who is good at their work and someone who is genuinely driven by it." She paused. "You could have kept walking. You were 11 minutes from an interview that would have changed your life. You didn't keep walking." Nora was quiet for a moment. How do you know I was 11 minutes away? Because I asked. Margaret lifted her glass. So, will you accept? Nora thought about the overnight shifts, the apartment with the bathroom door that didn't quite close all the way, the applications that disappeared into the void. Yes, she said, I'll accept. What Margaret Hargrove did not mention, over that lunch, was her son. Nora met Elliot Hargrove on her third day. She had been given a desk, a laptop, a stack of files that needed review, and a quick tour by a woman named Grace who ran the administrative side of the clinical floor and delivered information at a speed that suggested she'd given this particular tour approximately 400 times and was trying to set a record. Medical records. You'll spend a lot of time here. Kitchen. The coffee machine is temperamental. Hit it twice on the left side before you press the button. It works. Boardroom. Wednesday meetings. Don't be late. Mr. Hargrove doesn't like late. That's his office. Nora glanced at the closed door at the end of the hall. The founder? The son. Elliot Hargrove. He runs operations. The founder, that's Mrs. Margaret. She's semi-retired but still comes in twice a week and everyone behaves differently on those days, which tells you everything. Grace gave her a look that was deeply communicative. He's not terrible. He's just. She paused, searching for the word. What? Exact, Grace settled on. He's very exact. The door at the end of the hall opened before Nora could ask what that meant, and Elliot Hargrove walked out holding a tablet and frowning at it, in a way that suggested the tablet had personally disappointed him. He was tall, somewhere in his late 30s, dark-haired, in a suit that fit the way suits fit when they're made for the person wearing them rather than approximated. He looked up from the tablet when he noticed Nora, and his expression did not particularly change, which told her this was simply his face. You're the new coordinator, he said. Nora Callahan. Yes. He nodded once the way people nod when they've received a data point they expected. My mother told me about you. Good things, I hope. She said you were competent and stubborn. He looked back at his tablet. In her vocabulary, those are both compliments. He walked past her toward the boardroom. Welcome to Hargrove. Grace appeared at Nora's elbow the moment he turned the corner. See? Exact. Nora watched the empty hallway. He could stand to say hello properly. Oh, give it a month, Grace said cheerfully. He grows on you, like, she considered this, like a very serious houseplant. In the weeks that followed, Nora discovered that Elliot Hargrove was in fact not terrible. He was demanding and unsentimental and had opinions about operational efficiency that he expressed at length and without apology, but he was also fair in a way that mattered more than warmth. He never took credit for someone else's work, and he never punished someone for telling him the truth. He also noticed things. The intake protocol you flagged in Thursday's review, he said, appearing in her doorway one morning. Your notes were correct. I've asked compliance to look at it. Nora looked up from her screen. I wasn't sure if anyone would read them. I read everything. He paused in the doorway. He had a quality of hesitation that seemed unfamiliar to him, like a language he was studying. It was a good catch. Thank you. He left without saying anything else. Grace, passing in the hallway, caught Nora's eye through the glass and gave her an extremely significant look. Don't, Nora said. I didn't say anything, Grace said. The trouble began, as trouble often does, with someone who felt that Nora's arrival had rearranged things that were not supposed to be rearranged. His name was Patrick Voss, and he had been the operational coordinator at Hargrove Medical for 7 years. He was pleasant-faced and efficient and smiled easily at everyone, which in Nora's experience was not always a good sign. He began with small things, a file she needed that went to the wrong folder, a meeting she wasn't told about, a report she'd completed that reached Elliot's desk with a section missing, the section she had written. I think there was a formatting issue, Patrick said when Nora mentioned it, with the calm of someone who has rehearsed this. Right, Nora said. These things happen when multiple people are working in the same document. Of course, Nora said. And she went back to her desk and started keeping copies of everything. The woman who complicated things further was named Serena Walsh. She arrived for a board meeting in late October, tall, precise, with the kind of professional ease that came from having grown up in the right rooms. She was the CEO of a competing firm and had, according to Grace, who knew everything, once been engaged to Elliot Hargrove. 3 years ago, Grace said, peeling the wrapper off a granola bar in a way that suggested she was settling in for this conversation. She ended it, Now she's back, and she's been at every industry event for the last 2 months. Maybe she just wants to do business, Nora said. Grace gave her a look that said, with great patience, that Nora was being deliberately naive. Serena Walsh was polished and strategic and not overtly hostile, which in Nora's experience was sometimes worse than overt hostility. She asked Nora pointed questions about her qualifications in a tone that was technically respectful. She mentioned, in Elliot's presence, that she'd heard Nora's hiring had been unconventional. She laughed warmly when Elliot didn't respond to this. Patrick and Serena found each other quickly, the way that particular kind of person always does. The real trouble came in November. Hargrove Medical was bidding on a contract with a provincial health authority, the largest contract in the company's history. Nora had spent 3 weeks building the clinical assessment framework that would anchor the proposal. She cross-referenced data, flagged inconsistencies, built projections. She did not know how to do things halfway. On the morning of the presentation, she arrived at the boardroom to find the framework had been altered. Not obviously. You would have to know the original very well to see it. Someone had shifted the risk assessment numbers in a way that looked like a minor revision but changed the underlying conclusions entirely. The proposal as it stood would not survive a serious audit. Nora stood in the boardroom for a moment, looking at the screen. Then she went to find Grace. "I need access to the version history," Nora said. "I can't get that," Grace said. "You'd need IT, and IT takes 3 days. I need it in 40 minutes. Grace looked at her. "You know who has admin access?" They both looked toward the end of the hallway. Nora knocked on Elliot's office door. "Come in." She came in, closed the door, and told him everything. Quickly, clearly, without editorializing. The missing sections, the altered numbers, the version history she needed. She showed him the documentation she'd been keeping. Elliot did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You've been keeping records since October," he said. "Since the second time a file went missing?" "Yes. Why didn't you come to me then? Because I didn't have enough to show you yet. You're exact. I needed to be exact too." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. He picked up his phone and called IT directly. 7 minutes later, they had the version history. The last edit had been made at 11:47 the previous night, from Patrick Voss's credentials. The board meeting was delayed by 40 minutes. When it reconvened, Nora presented the original framework. The provincial health authority asked 3 questions, all of which she answered without notes. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something has shifted. Margaret Hargrove, who had come in that day and was seated at the back of the room, watched her daughter-in-law, though she was not that yet, and permitted herself a small, private smile. The contract was awarded to Hargrove Medical 2 weeks later. Patrick Voss resigned before Elliot had the chance to address him formally. Serena Walsh attended one more industry event, realized Elliot was not coming, and redirected her professional attention elsewhere. These things resolved themselves with the brisk efficiency of situations that were always going to resolve this way. What did not resolve itself was the thing between Nora and Elliot, which had been building with the slow certainty of weather. It started, as these things often do, with something small. He brought coffee to her desk one morning, just set it there without comment, the way she took it, which she had not told him, but which he had apparently noticed. She stayed late one Thursday to finish a report and found him still at his desk at 9 o'clock, jacket off, working in silence. "You don't have to stay," he said without looking up. "I'm not staying for you," she said. "I'm staying for the report." "I know," he said, and there was something in those 2 words that had nothing to do with the report. They started having lunch together, occasionally, in the way that starts as coincidence and stops being coincidence after the 3rd time. He asked her about her paramedic years. She asked him why he'd gone into healthcare administration, when he clearly could have done something with less paperwork. "My mother built something real," he said. "I wanted to help her keep it. That's a good reason. It's the only reason I've ever needed." He looked at her directly. "Why did you stop on King Street? You were 11 minutes away. I couldn't not stop. That's not an answer." "Yes, it is." She looked back at him. "Some things aren't decisions. They're just who you are." He was quiet for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect? Honestly? I expected someone my mother had collected. She has a habit of finding people and deciding their lives for them." He paused. "I thought you'd be grateful and manageable." Nora put down her fork. And you're neither. He didn't say it as a criticism. He said it like a man who had just figured something out and was still getting used to the shape of it. The day Margaret Hargrove called them both into her office, together, was a Thursday in December. Gray light coming off Lake Ontario, the city in that particular mood it gets before the first real snow. She looked at them both when they came in, with the calm of someone who has been waiting for a meeting she scheduled for herself. "Sit down," she said. They sat. "I want to give Nora a seat on the board," Margaret said. Elliot looked at his mother. Nora looked at Margaret. A beat of silence went by. "She's been here 8 months," Elliot said. "I'm aware. The board is going to ask questions. They ask questions about everything. That's what boards are for." Margaret looked at Nora. "You saved the most significant contract this company has had in a decade. You did it by being prepared, by being thorough, and by trusting your own judgment when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I trust your judgment." She paused. "I also want this formalized, not as a favor, as a recognition of what you've actually contributed." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Hargrove, Margaret, I don't want this if it creates problems for the company. It won't create problems that I can't handle." Margaret's voice was entirely level. "And if someone objects, they can object to me personally. I've been in this industry for 30 years. I have a very good memory." Elliot, beside Nora, said nothing. But when Nora glanced at him, he was watching his mother with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something like relief. "She's right," he said quietly. "You've earned it." Nora looked at him. He looked back. The gray December light came through the window and sat between them, and neither of them looked away. "All right," Nora said finally. "Yes." Margaret folded her hands on her desk with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has just completed a plan she made 8 months ago outside a hospital, on a day her son was 2 blocks away and didn't even know. Christmas came, and with it the company's annual dinner, which was held at a restaurant in the Distillery District. Nora wore a green dress she'd borrowed from her roommate, and arrived knowing no one well enough to feel comfortable, and knowing enough people to get through the evening, which is a specific skill she had learned from working in rooms where she was always the youngest or the least credentialed, or both. She found Elliot at the bar, not drinking, watching the room. "You look uncomfortable," she said. "I'm always uncomfortable at these." "Then why do you come?" "Because my mother reminds me it matters to the staff." He glanced at her. "You look—" He stopped. "I look what?" "Different," he said. "Not different bad. Different." He seemed genuinely frustrated with himself, which she found, against her better judgment, endearing. "You can say good, Elliot. It's a complete sentence." "You look good," he said. And then, before she could say anything, "Dance with me." It was not a question exactly. It was not quite a command. It was the tone of a person who has decided something and is slightly terrified of it. "All right," she said. They danced. Slowly, a bit stiffly at first, and then less stiffly. The room continued around them. "I owe you an apology," he said, over the music. "For what?" "For what I said about expecting you to be manageable." It was a condescending thing to say. It was. "I'm sorry." She considered this. "You were honest about it, at least. That's something. I'm always honest, I know." She looked at him. "It's one of the things She stopped. "One of the things you what?" She looked at him for a long moment. "One of the things I respect about you." He held her gaze. "Is that all?" The song changed. Neither of them moved. "No," she said quietly. "That's not all." They stood there on the edge of the dance floor with the whole complicated truth of it between them, and neither of them ran from it. His mother, seated at a table across the room with Grace, who had apparently been invited and had arrived bearing an extremely elaborate hostess gift, watched the two of them with the expression of a woman who has been correct about something important for a very long time. 8 months, Grace said, sipping her wine. "I thought it would take longer, honestly," Margaret said. "You're being modest." Margaret smiled. "Perhaps." In the months that followed, the life Nora had been building quietly and alone became something she was building with someone. It was not seamless. Elliot was stubborn and overscheduled and had strong opinions about how a kitchen should be organized. Nora was private about things that mattered to her and took too long to ask for help. They argued about this. They figured it out. Margaret came to the office twice a week and pretended not to notice everything she noticed. Grace, who noticed everything and made no pretense about it, was deeply satisfied with how all of this had turned out and told anyone who would listen that she had seen it coming from day one. The board seat was formalized in the spring. There were questions, as Margaret had predicted. She answered them as she had promised. One board member suggested that Nora's position was perhaps unusual for someone of her tenure. Margaret looked at him for a moment and said, very pleasantly, "She secured the provincial contract and rebuilt our clinical compliance framework from the ground up. What would you suggest she would need to do additionally?" The board member did not raise the issue again. On a Tuesday in April, Nora went back to the sidewalk on King Street. She didn't plan it. She was just walking, and then she was there. The same coffee shop, the same stretch of pavement. She stood there for a moment in the spring air, thinking about who she had been when she dropped to her knees on this spot 8 months ago. The pressed blazer, the 11 minutes, the careful timing of a life she'd been holding together with both hands and hoping it would be enough. She thought about the woman on the pavement, the way her eyes had gone confused and then clear. The first thing she'd said, "My son, he's going to worry." And how Nora had not known yet, had not even suspected, that she already knew the shape of that son from somewhere she couldn't have named. She took out her phone and called Elliot. "Where are you?" he asked. "King Street." A pause. "The coffee shop?" "Yeah." "I'll come," he said immediately. "Not do you want company, or are you okay?" "Just I'll come," which was one of the things about him, one of the specific things, that had undone her quietly and completely. He arrived in 12 minutes, which was fast. He was not wearing his jacket. "You didn't have to rush," she said. "I know," he said. He stood beside her and looked at the sidewalk. "Is this where?" "Yeah." They stood there together for a moment on the King Street sidewalk, with the spring city moving around them. "She planned it, you know," Nora said. "Your mother. At least partially. I know." She looked at him. "You know?" "She told me. In January, she thought it was important that I know she hadn't faked the seizure." A pause. "She did have the seizure. But she had been meaning to walk past the Hargrove building that morning, and she had been watching your application for 2 weeks, and she knew what time you'd be leaving the subway." Nora stared at him. "Elliot, she's a very thorough person. Your mother engineered a medical event into a meet-cute. She didn't engineer the seizure. The seizure was just." He paused. "Convenient, from her perspective." Nora looked at the sidewalk. Then she started to laugh. Not politely, properly, helplessly, until she had to put her hand over her mouth. "This is funny to you," Elliot said. "This is incredibly funny to me. She could have just forwarded your application." "Elliot." Nora wiped her eyes. "If she'd just forwarded my application, I would have gotten a job." "Like this," she gestured between them. "None of this." He looked at her. His face did the thing it sometimes did where it tried to stay composed and didn't entirely succeed. "No," he said. "I suppose not." She took his hand. He held it with the same careful attention he gave to everything that mattered to him, which she had learned to recognize as his particular version of tenderness. "I'm going to have a talk with her," Nora said. "She'll enjoy that." "I know. I'm going to enjoy it too." They stood on King Street in the April sun, holding hands on the sidewalk where everything had started, where Nora had dropped to her knees without deciding to, where a woman had opened her eyes and said, "My son," where a life had turned on 11 minutes and a choice that wasn't even a choice, just who she was, and neither of them needed to say that it had all been worth it, because some things don't need to be said. They already know.